Chapter 1 Rebirth. On the day when I was getting married to my boyfriend, my cousin threw photos of me in private moments with other men all over the wedding venue. Cousin, love should be faithful and can't have any stain. How can a woman like you who plays around with several men get happiness? Thus, I became a slut despised by everyone. Finally, I was hit and killed by a car in a trance. When I opened my eyes again, I went back to 3 hours before the wedding began. The pain of being run over by the wheels back and forth seemed to still be on my body. I hugged myself in fear until the newly done manicure was broken by me. The pain gradually brought me back to my senses. Only then did I vaguely realize. Was I reborn? My cousin Vivian had been fond of reading romantic novels about the overbearing school hunk falling in love with the heroine since she was a child. She always fantasized about spending her campus youth with a handsome, knowledgeable, and wealthy princely school hunk and finally walking into the marriage hall with him. However, later, the princely school hunk in her fantasy was with me and was even going to marry me. In the previous life, resentment grew in her heart, and she tried every means to stop me from marrying my boyfriend. But my boyfriend still chose to enter marriage with me without hesitation. So on the day of the wedding, my cousin wore a pure white fishtail wedding dress. The exquisite makeup made her look like a real-life Barbie doll. She took out a stack of photos from her bag and threw them hard at the guests present. She asked me loudly, "Cousin, love should be faithful and can't have any stain. How can a woman like you who plays around with several men get happiness?" In the photos, I was naked and entangled with several men. The lustful gazes of the men below scanned my body, making me feel as disgusted as if I had swallowed a fly. After that, my boyfriend coaxed and tricked me into being put under house arrest in his home under the pretext of investigating the truth. I thought he was trying to keep me away from the rumors outside. Unexpectedly, he actually wanted me to become a mobile blood bank and a kidney source for his adopted sister. After learning the truth, I jumped out of the window on the 5th floor and left, crippling my legs. As a result, just as I walked out of the community, I was hit and flown away by a red sports car coming head-on. The sports car ran over me back and forth again and again, for fear that I would get up again. My parents tried to seek justice for me. After being blocked at the police station, they spoke up for me on the internet. However, they were slandered by my cousin for using the dead to attract attention and make money. In the end, they were even angered to death by my cousin who broke into our home. Recalling the humiliation at the wedding in the previous life, the disgust of being deceived and used by my boyfriend, and the tragic death of my parents, my heart felt as if it was being burned by a raging fire, and I was in extreme pain. I thought I had treated my cousin, who had been abandoned by her parents since childhood, quite well. My parents even treated her like their own daughter. However, she was so cold-hearted, selfish, and only for the illusory love, she put me and my parents in an impossible situation. Fortunately, God had eyes and gave me a chance to take revenge again. I picked up the mobile phone on the dressing table and took a look. There were still 3 hours left before the wedding began. I clicked into my cousin's WeChat moments again. I found that she had just posted a WeChat moment 5 minutes ago. The location was a wedding dress shop not far from the hotel. The person I like is getting married today. In order to make my youth have no regrets, I've decided to be bold this time. The picture attached was a white wedding dress and the back of a man. Some people below echoed, while others questioned. "What are you looking at?" The sudden voice almost made me drop my mobile phone. I was just about to turn around when a hand landed on my shoulder. The handsome face of my boyfriend was reflected in the dressing mirror. Jasper had a faint smile on his lips and was looking at me gently. I quietly placed the mobile phone upside down on the table.
Facing the ancient ferocity of the blood wolf, Jianluan, already fatigued from the previous fight, looked particularly grim. He raised his hand and cast a Woji seal in front of him, then started to reach.
When I mentioned my cousin, I noticed that Jasper's face stiffened for a moment. "Don't worry. You're her cousin. She'll come," he casually replied perfunctorily. After saying that, he received a phone call. There was more anxiety in his eyes and brows. Without even leaving a word to comfort me, he strode away. I knew clearly who could make him so anxious. However, it wasn't the time to focus on her now. My eyes fell on the printer in the corner of the dressing room. Vivian, since you're so reluctant to let the wedding go on, then I'll just have to give you a hand. No matter what, you have to experience the humiliation I suffered in the previous life once. An hour and a half before the wedding began, I put the printed photos into my bag. Since I got together with Jasper, Vivian had always been imitating me intentionally or unintentionally, from the big aspects like dressing style, makeup, and hairstyle to the small aspects like daily habits, eating, and sleeping. Even the fishtail wedding dress she posted in her WeChat moments was exactly the same as the one I was wearing now. However, I should still be a bit grateful to her at the moment. Otherwise, how could I exchange the bag in my hand with the one in her hand later? Half an hour before the wedding began, the parents and relatives of both sides arrived one after another. And I also saw Jasper's adopted sister when I was greeting the guests. She smiled faintly at me and wished Jasper and me happiness. Hearing her words, it was Jasper and his mother who reacted a bit unnaturally. 10 minutes before the wedding began, I got the red leather bag that the delivery guy had exchanged from Vivian backstage. I transferred 1,000 yuan to him. I didn't take out the photos in the bag until I watched him leave. Even though I already knew what was in the bag, when I saw it with my own eyes when I took them out, I still couldn't help feeling disappointed. I burned all the photos, not leaving a single one. I then took out Vivian's mobile phone and unlocked it. Fortunately, it opened when I tried Jasper's birthday. I sent a WeChat moment in Vivian's tone and also posted her latest works on her various social media to give her a surprise. The wedding officially began. Just like in the previous life, when Jasper and I were about to exchange wedding rings, Vivian appeared. Wait a minute. I don't agree. All the eyes in the venue fell on Vivian at once. Especially when they saw that she was wearing the same wedding dress as me. There were even more discussions. Damn, is she trying to steal the bride? How exciting. Isn't she the cousin on the bride's side? Why is she dressed the same as the bride? I think this wedding definitely won't be held today. I don't know if the money given as gifts will be refunded then. Vivian slightly raised her chin and came to Jasper and me without caring about the strange looks of others. I met her mocking and disdainful eyes, and my palms were sweating nervously. Here it comes, here it comes. This moment has finally come. I saw Vivian first look at Jasper affectionately and lingeringly, and then she reached into her bag and threw the photos into the air. Crash! The photos fluttered down like white snowflakes. She said, "Cousin Love should be faithful and can't have any stain. How can a woman like you who plays around with several men get happiness?" She looked at me triumphantly, full of provocation. But when her eyes fell on Jasper beside me who was wearing a white suit, her eyes were full of tenderness. Brother Jasper, cousin doesn't deserve your love at all. Actually, it's me who has always liked you. I fell in love with you from the first time I saw you. Every time I saw you being close to cousin, my heart felt like it was being cut by a knife. She narrated her love for Jasper as if there was no one else around, completely unaware of the unfriendly and disgusted looks of the guests on her. Until Jasper's eyes moved away with a hint of disgust. The one I've always liked is Mercy. If you're here to attend the wedding and bless us today, then I welcome you. If not, please leave immediately and don't stay here and do something embarrassing. Even if it's not for yourself, you should also think about Mercy and her parents who have raised you in these years. Hearing Jasper's words, I moved my eyes away from Vivian and fell on my parents in the audience with slightly red eyes and a hint of anger. Thinking of how Vivian became famous on the internet by stepping on me in the previous life and later even angered my parents to death, I couldn't wait to rush up and tear her mouth apart. I bent down and picked up a photo on the ground. Vivian had come onto the stage while throwing the photos just now. The content of the photo was unbearable to look at. Seeing my action, Vivian sneered, "What cousin do you want to unlock a new pose on the spot? You're too slutty." Her words stopped abruptly. Vivian's eyes were fixed on the photo in my hand that was turned towards her, and her face suddenly turned pale. I smiled slightly and said, "Vivian, I didn't expect that you who claimed to have never been in a relationship were actually so wild and private. You can just keep these photos for yourself. Why did you take them out to share with everyone on such an important day? You're really too slutty. I looked her up and down with mocking eyes. Suddenly, someone in the audience laughed out loud. Then others couldn't help it and laughed one after another. Vivian was trembling with anger. She took a big step forward, snatched the photo from my hand, and tore it up hard. She glared at me viciously. How could the person in the photo be me? It's clearly you. Tell me, did you change my photos? How could you be so vicious? Brother Jasper won't like someone like you. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my flesh, and she even wanted to raise her hand to slap me. I coldly kicked her away. She couldn't stand steadily because of her high heels and fell directly from the stage. Seeing this, my parents couldn't sit still and rushed up directly to surround me and asked me if I was okay. My mother also angrily scolded, "She's just an ungrateful wolf. We shouldn't have been soft-hearted and adopted her in the first place." Vivian, who was in a mess after falling on the ground in the audience, suddenly became excited when she heard this. "You've finally said this. In the hearts of your whole family you've never regarded me as your family member. I've always been an outsider. If you really loved me you should have let Mercy give Brother Jasper to me." She stood up in a mess and threw everything she could get her hands on to the ground as if to vent her anger. If the broken porcelain pieces hadn't suddenly flown onto Jasper's adopted sister, Jasper would probably have just watched this farce coldly. "Have you made enough of a scene? How long on earth are you going to keep making such a fuss like a madwoman?" Jasper roared impatiently at Vivian and directly took out his mobile phone to call the police. Then, without saying another word, he helped his adopted sister leave the scene. He didn't give a single thought to me who was still in my wedding dress. But I didn't care either. After all, this wedding couldn't go on anyway. My parents went to comfort the guests. Just then, I slowly walked up to Vivian. Vivian said smugly, "Anyway, since the wedding can't continue, you and Brother Jasper aren't really husband and wife. I still have a chance." I looked at her with mixed emotions. Was it really worth it to go to such lengths with her own sister just for a man, and even not hesitate to use rumors to ruin someone's reputation? Looking at Vivian, whose eyes and heart were now full of Jasper, I just thought that she didn't care about her brain or her face for the sake of love. "Do you think I'll just let this matter go today? Do you still think that in a few days, if you act coquettishly and show some weakness to me, I and my parents will forgive you?" Vivian had an expression as if she knew everything for sure. I was even angered to laughter. I was laughed at by my former self. It's no wonder she had such confidence. After all, in the past, no matter what excessive things she did, as long as she acted coquettishly and showed weakness, I and my parents would indeed forgive her like that. "But not anymore," I said. Then, in her disbelieving eyes, I grabbed her hair and slapped her hard twice. "Haven't you already torn faces with me? Don't you always think that you've been an outsider? Then today I'll show you how I'll beat you an outsider." Chapter 2 ending. Ah. Brother Jasper hates women who are violent. If you treat me like this when I tell Brother Jasper about it later, he'll definitely break up with you. I grabbed her hands that were trying to resist, pinched the back of her neck, and directly pressed her head hard against the ground. Once, twice. The sound of the impact was a bit dull. My parents thoughtfully closed the door and silently stood aside. In the empty hall, Vivian's sobs and curses echoed. I tore off the veil she had carefully prepared and roughly wiped off the makeup on her face with a tissue. If it hadn't been for my father's presence, I would definitely have torn off the wedding dress she was wearing. "Mercy. Ah. You'll come to a bad end. You slut, you bitch. I'll definitely make Brother Jasper break up with you." My mother's face turned red with anger at Vivian's words, cursing me. She took a big step forward and slapped her hard twice. Finally, the police came and pulled my mother away. Because Vivian spread pornographic pictures and malicious intentions in public, she was taken away by the police. My mother and I were also asked to go to the police station to make statements because we had physically assaulted someone. On the way, I received the news that Jasper had temporarily cancelled the wedding. Well, his beloved adopted sister was injured and almost got so stimulated that she had to be hospitalized. Of course, he couldn't care about the wedding anymore. Now I'm extremely grateful that I didn't get the marriage certificate with Jasper for various reasons at that time. When we arrived at the police station and finished making the statements, my mother and I were able to leave soon. But Vivian was temporarily detained, because no one was willing to bail her out. Vivian came to our family when she was 8 years old. According to my parents, because Vivian's parents thought she was a burden and always snatched her younger brother's things, they left her in their rural hometown. At that time, my parents were worried that she would live too hard on her own, so they softened their hearts and took her home. However, they didn't expect that it was that moment of soft-heartedness that led to the miserable lives of me and my parents. As soon as we got home, my mother couldn't wait to rush into Vivian's room, pack all her luggage, and throw it outside the door. Mercy, your father definitely can't be soft-hearted this time. I've always said that she's insatiable. It was okay that she cried and tried to snatch our daughter's recommended admission quota before. But now she even dared to do this at the wedding. After a pause, my mother carefully looked at me and comforted me. Mercy, don't worry. Later Mom will contact that Jasper kid and will definitely hold a more grand wedding for you next time. Seeing that I didn't say anything, my mother thought I was angry because of what happened today, so she quickly pushed me to go back to my room to rest. But how could I have the mood to rest? The wedding with Jasper couldn't continue anyway. Recalling the helplessness and confusion when I was imprisoned in the villa by Jasper in my previous life, I thought that I still needed to find a bodyguard to protect myself. And what happened at the wedding today was quickly spread by word of mouth among relatives. Only this time, the main character was Vivian instead of me. This incident caused quite a stir. Some relatives even recorded videos and took a few pictures of Vivian away to share with others as gossip. In order to prevent Vivian from using online public opinion to distort the truth first, during the days when she was detained, I specifically bought several hot search topics. By the day Vivian was released from the police station, she had already been on Weibo for a while because of her wanton behavior exposed at the wedding. Vivian was a somewhat famous online celebrity on Douyin. After the Weibo hot search exploded, all the private messages in her background were scolding her, and her number of fans dropped drastically. Even when she was recognized by passers-by on the day she left the police station, she was pointed at and criticized for a long time. I originally thought that since we had torn faces with each other, there would be no more contact. But I didn't expect that she could be so thick-skinned. I've been detained for several days because of you. Even the wedding dress I rented was damaged by you. It's okay if you don't pay me compensation, but you still want to drive me out of the house. Is there any justice? That's your own doing. If you hadn't made such a scene at Mercy's wedding and coveted your cousin's husband, you wouldn't be in this situation now. My mother blocked the door with a kitchen knife and refused to let Vivian in no matter what. Vivian's eyes were a bit red, and she defended herself. Love doesn't come in order. Even if my cousin has already got the marriage certificate with brother Jasper, I still have a chance. My mother was angered to laughter by Vivian's remarks. I've never seen anyone who can be so brazen about being a mistress. It seems that you can't change your bad habits. You always think that what others have is better. Say whatever you want. Anyway, I won't change my feelings for brother Jasper. Please let me through. I'm going back to my room. Seeing Vivian trying to push her way in so shamelessly, I stretched out my hand to prop against the door frame to block her. Going back to your room? What room? This is my house. Your luggage was packed by us and put in the outside warehouse a few days ago. Go get it yourself. Don't forget to transfer the packing fee to me later. Vivian's face changed slightly. How dare you enter my room and touch my things without permission? My father shouted angrily. This is my house. I bought this house. How dare you be so reasonable? You ruined my daughter's wedding, and now you still want to stay here. How can you calculate so well? Vivian had always been afraid of my father. Seeing that my father spoke, she knew in her heart that we were planning to completely draw a line with her. She still tried to hold her ground unreasonably. Fine. Remember this. You drove me away. Even if you kneel down and beg me in the future, I'll definitely never come back. I smiled and said, even if you kneel down and kowtow to me in the future, I'll never let you step into my house again. Vivian looked at me disappointedly. Cousin, I still regarded you as my cousin. How have you changed like this? What's the difference between your current appearance and those middle-aged women outside who only know how to haggle? How could Brother Jasper fall in love with someone like you? Hearing her words, I sneered with a bit of dissatisfaction. Yes, but it's precisely someone like me that made the Brother Jasper you mentioned beg me to marry him. How could that be? Brother Jasper is such a proud person and would never beg you. Vivian stamped her foot angrily, gave me a fierce glare, and then left in a hurry. I knew that she was going to find Jasper. But what I said just now really didn't deceive her. After all, Jasper did beg me to marry him. Otherwise, how could he have made me willing to donate my kidney? On the night when the wedding ended, Jasper looked tired as he waited for me downstairs at my house. As soon as he saw me, instead of comforting me for the grievance I suffered at the wedding, he immediately asked me to go and have a kidney matching test for his adopted sister. Xingxing is now in the late stage of kidney failure. Her mother and I just can't find a kidney source. Even if we find one, it's already reserved by other patients. Mercy, I've seen your previous physical examination report. Your kidney matches Xingxing's. Please, save Xingxing. After the operation is successful, we'll immediately get the marriage certificate and get married, okay? Haven't you always wanted to be with me and have our own little family? He looked at me expectantly. But what I said next turned his expectation into full disappointment. Jasper, do you think I'm some kind of cheap person in your heart? For the sake of marrying you, I have to donate one of my kidneys. You've really calculated well. Since you're so worried about your sister, why don't you donate your own kidney to her? Enough. He looked at me with a gloomy face, and his eyes were terrifying. What's wrong with asking you to donate one kidney? You'll only lose one kidney, but Xingxing will lose her life. Seeing that I looked at him expressionlessly, his expression changed from stiff to gentle again. Mercy, I know what you're worried about. Don't worry. There's nothing between me and Xingxing. It's not what you think. If you're worried about the marriage, I can go and get the marriage certificate with you right now. I sneered disdainfully. Who cares about that stupid marriage certificate? Probably only the current Jasper and Vivian care about it. Vivian had completely disappeared from my life. I didn't know if she went to find Jasper, but I didn't care either. However, Jasper wanted to use Vivian to disgust me. To force me, make me anxious, and make me take the initiative to find him, lower my head, and agree to donate a kidney to his adopted sister. That was absolutely impossible. Mercy, your cousin came to find me again. I heard that your uncle and aunt drove her out of the house and she has no place to live now. For your sake, I took her in. The attached picture showed Vivian happily making a victory sign at the camera. Mercy, my sister's condition has worsened again. If possible, could you come to the hospital to see her? The attached picture showed a girl lying on the hospital bed with her eyes closed and full of infusion tubes. After that, Jasper always sent me messages, but I just marked them as read and didn't reply. Until the day when I was about to go on a trip with my parents, he came to my door. Mercy, where are you guys going? I hadn't seen him for several days, and Jasper looked rather haggard. There was a thin stubble on his chin, dark circles under his eyes, and he seemed listless. When he saw me dressed brightly, his eyes lit up for a moment. But then they darkened again. What are you doing here? You're not welcome here. My mother showed hostility as soon as she saw Jasper and turned around, wanting to go back inside to get her rolling pin. During this period, when my parents saw that I had no communication with Jasper, they tried to persuade me. However, when they learned that Jasper wanted to marry me just to find a good kidney source for his adopted sister, they were so angry that they wanted to take a knife and go to the hospital to seek justice for me that very night. Since then, they never mentioned Jasper's name in front of me again. And I was afraid that the incident of them being angered to death in my previous life would happen again, so I quickly took them to the hospital for examinations and got a lot of medicine for them to take. I even decided to take them on a trip. The purpose was to avoid Vivian and Jasper for the time being. Mom and Dad, I know I've neglected Mercy during this period, but I also have my difficulties, Jasper said with a bitter smile, trying to play the victim. My father said coldly, "What difficulties could you have? Isn't it just that you're worried because your dear sister didn't get a kidney source and then set your sights on my daughter?" Hearing this, Jasper looked at me in disbelief. He didn't expect that I would tell my parents about this matter just like that. I smiled slightly and said, "Jasper, anyway, we didn't get the marriage certificate in the first place, and the wedding wasn't completed either. Let's part on good terms and don't make it too ugly. Nowadays, the internet is so developed. If you try to use some underhanded means to force me to donate my kidney, I can also call the police and post it online to make you famous in a bad way." Jasper looked at me sadly and said, "Mercy, how can you think of me like this? We've known each other for so long, and we almost got married. Don't you know what kind of person I am?" I said, "It's precisely because I know you too well that I know you're not as honest as you seem on the surface. If possible, it's okay as long as you don't show up in front of me and don't play any tricks. But if you insist on pestering me, then I'll have to go to the police station and talk about it. By the way, if you and Vivian want to do something or have something going on between you two, you don't have to deliberately send messages to disgust me. After all, it's best for exes not to contact each other, right?" Jasper was stunned by what I said and didn't come to his senses for quite a while. By the time he recovered, I was already on my way to the airport with my parents. Before boarding the plane, I avoided my parents and made a call to Vivian. After the phone rang twice, it was connected. I pretended to be eager to show off to Vivian and said, "Vivian, Jasper said that as long as I'm willing to donate my kidney to his sister, he'll immediately get the marriage certificate with me and hold the wedding again. Then you'll never have a chance." There was silence on the other end of the phone for a while before Vivian's low laughter came. "Cousin, don't even think about being with Jasper in this life. I'm already in the hospital preparing for the operation now." Jasper's mother said that as long as I agree to donate my kidney and have the operation, she'll let Jasper marry me. Oh, I forgot to tell you that Jasper and I have already consummated our marriage. Even through the phone now, I could imagine Vivian's smug and provocative face. However, I really didn't expect that Vivian would be so willing to donate her kidney just to marry Jasper. But her kidney couldn't possibly match Jasper's adopted sister's. Otherwise, in the previous life, why would Jasper choose to marry me instead of Vivian, who was crazy about him? Recalling that 3 days ago I received a call from Jasper's mother. It turned out that the others she mentioned in "If You Don't Want To, There Are Others Who Will" were Vivian. "Daughter, what are you daydreaming about? We're about to board the plane." "Oh, okay." Interrupted by my father like this, I stopped thinking about Vivian's affairs. After all, one is willing to fight and the other is willing to endure. However, what I didn't expect was that a few days later, I saw Vivian at the entrance of the hotel. "Cousin," as soon as Vivian saw me, she immediately came up to me looking aggrieved. "What are you doing here? Who told you where I'm staying?" I took a few steps back to avoid her hand. Vivian missed and didn't feel embarrassed. Instead, she came up to me with a smile and tried to hold my arm. "I saw the moments that Aunt posted a few days ago. Cousin, you're really something. You didn't even take me with you when you went out to play. Am I still your cousin or not?" Looking at her pretentious coquettish look, I couldn't help clenching my mobile phone. When something abnormal happens, there must be something fishy. She said a few days ago that she was preparing for the operation. How could she be so lively and come to me now? Seeing that I didn't speak, Vivian shook my arm and said, "Oh, cousin, I know you're still angry about what happened before. I also know that I was wrong before. Please forgive me. We've lived together for so many years. How can our relationship break down just because of such a trifle?" I coldly pulled my hand away. "In your eyes, it's a trifle, but if I were the person in those photos back then, my whole life would have been ruined by you. Whether you really realize your mistake or are forced to realize it because of other things has nothing to do with me. Vivian's face became embarrassed by what I said. Do you have to make our relationship so bad? Are you sure it's me who's making it bad? I asked her back. Vivian was immediately at a loss for words and looked away with her eyes wandering. I followed her gaze and saw a figure flash by in the coffee shop not far away. After warning Vivian not to show up in front of me again, I quickly walked into the hotel and went back to my room. I covered my chest and my heart was beating rapidly. I definitely wasn't mistaken just now. The person Vivian subconsciously looked at just now was Jasper. He actually came along too. It seemed that he was determined to make me donate my kidney. After hesitating for a while, I still dialed that number. Just as you said, Jasper and Vivian did come to find me. On the other end of the video, the girl was wearing a hospital gown and looking at me with a serene smile. She was Ella, Jasper's adopted sister. Actually, I didn't know much about the relationships in Jasper's family. I only knew that he had an adopted sister. And Ella was taken in by Jasper's adoptive parents from the orphanage at his request. The operation was supposed to be carried out at that time, but Jasper, who rushed over, stopped it. He said to me, "Vivian is too dirty. Only Mercy's kidney can match mine." In fact, it was just because Vivian's kidney didn't match Ella's. If it really matched, he wouldn't care whether it was dirty or not. Ella told me that when I was in love with Jasper in the early years, he had already secretly asked the family doctor to come to my home to do a kidney matching test between me and her. Actually, Jasper had mentioned to me that he wanted me to have the operation for Ella. But I'm an only child. What would my parents do if something happened to me? So I refused Jasper at that time, and he didn't mention it again after that. I thought that matter was over at that time. I didn't expect that Jasper had remembered it for so long. Even later, when signing the prenuptial agreement, he tried to trick me into signing an organ donation contract. If I hadn't discovered it in time, I'm afraid that not long after signing the contract, Jasper would have found someone to kill me. Poor me, I was so blindly in love back then that even so, I still wanted to marry him. Jasper will definitely do something to you next. Let me think. I guess he'll ask Vivian to invite you out, drug you to make you unconscious, and then take you back. Anyway, be careful yourself. Why are you helping me? If Jasper really succeeds, you can also live a life free from the torture of illness. I was still a bit wary of Ella. What if this was a trap set up by them together? I couldn't afford to take the risk. I really couldn't. Hearing what I said, Ella in the video seemed a bit sad. Suddenly, the wind blew in through the window. I saw the girl's thin body under the loose hospital gown. She was so thin. Ella suddenly looked at me and said, "I didn't want to live in the first place. For me, the Jasper family and Jasper are all demons that make it hard for me to breathe." Her smile was full of bitterness. Since Vivian showed up, just as Ella said, she had indeed been trying to invite me out alone all the time. I refused every time. She then set her sights on my parents. Having no choice, in order to solve this matter as soon as possible, I could only agree to Vivian's invitation. On the day Vivian invited me out, I asked my parents to stay in the hotel and not go anywhere. The bodyguards I hired had also been quietly following me. It seemed that Vivian really just invited me out to have fun. We went to the nearby scenic spots and the amusement park. She was so humble in front of me, as if she really just wanted to beg for my forgiveness. But when she put a cup of milk tea in front of me, I knew they were about to make a move. "Cousin, this is your favorite milk tea. Why don't you drink it?" Vivian looked at me with an innocent smile, as if she just said it casually, but her eyes kept glancing at the cup of milk tea. "I'm afraid you'll drug me for Jasper's sake." I picked up the milk tea and carefully examined it. Vivian was stunned by what I said. "Cousin, what are you talking about? How could I drug you? We're real cousins." When she said this, she subconsciously clenched her mobile phone. I looked at her and smiled. "Yes, we're real cousins. As the saying goes, even between close brothers, accounts should be clearly settled. Then between close cousins, the accounts should be even clearer." Under Vivian's slightly nervous gaze, I slowly put the straw of the milk tea to my mouth. Brother Jasper, I saw her drink the milk tea with my own eyes. I don't know why she didn't pass out. You have to believe me. I really want to be with you." The moment Jasper appeared, the bodyguards behind me rushed up and subdued him on the ground. Vivian panicked for a moment and quickly explained. "If you want to explain, go to the police station to explain," I said. Jasper looked calm and said, "We didn't cause you any substantial harm. Even if we go to the police station, it'll just be a round of questioning." Hearing Jasper's words, Vivian also calmed down. "Cousin, why do you have to make a big deal out of it? Your parents are old. What if they get sick from anger?" I laughed and crouched down in front of Jasper, then played a video. Jasper's pupils contracted when he saw it, and his lips opened and closed, but he didn't know what to say. Only said, "Why do you have this video?" In a video that lasted more than 3 hours, it showed how Jasper tortured Ella in the kitchen, toilet, and dormitory of the orphanage. The reason why Ella became the adopted daughter of the Jasper family and Jasper's adopted sister was that Jasper fell in love with her at first sight and forced himself on her in the library of the orphanage. However, Jasper had a rather subtle obsession when it came to love. He didn't want to give Ella a proper status. He enjoyed the excitement in the dark, even if it couldn't be seen in the light of day. In order to make Ella a caged canary, he begged his parents and the Jasper family to adopt Ella. He didn't allow Ella to go out to study or work, and he didn't let her make friends. During these 5 years of life, Ella was tortured by Jasper so much that she suffered from severe depression. Finally, she was even diagnosed with kidney failure. At this time, Jasper panicked. Because he realized his feelings for Ella. If before, Jasper regarded Ella as a plaything, then after Ella was diagnosed with kidney failure, he truly realized that he had fallen in love with her. So, in order to find a good kidney source for Ella, Jasper used all the connections of the Jasper family. Unexpectedly, he snatched the kidney source that the daughter of a certain important figure in the city had been waiting for. As a result, the Jasper family was driven out of the city. "That's why I met Jasper in the city. Jasper, you're really a beast. It's you who ruined Kyla. You'll get what you deserve." Ella's original name was Kyla. If it weren't for Jasper, she could have gone to the university she liked to study and live. I remembered. In my previous life, after I was hit and killed, the figure I saw in a trance was Jasper. When I was on the verge of death, he forced me to write an organ donation agreement. He carried me onto the cold operating table. The slightly cool scalpel cut through my skin. It was he who studied medicine, who personally performed the operation and took out my kidney. Kyla originally thought that when she died, she could end this unfortunate life. However, she didn't expect that because of Jasper, she fell into despair again. The pure white jasmine was finally buried by the dirty black soil. Its original color couldn't be seen. I took the half-conscious Jasper to Kyla. The wind on the rooftop was very strong, which made all 3 of us sober up. Especially when Jasper saw Kyla standing outside the guardrail barefoot in a white dress, he crawled over on his knees. "Ella, what are you doing? Don't scare your brother. Come down quickly." He begged humbly and wretchedly, his bloodshot eyes fixed firmly on the precarious Kyla. Kyla tilted her head. "Jasper, it's you who ruined me. How dare you show up in front of me? It's my fault, it's my fault. As long as you come down, I'll do anything you want. I've already found a kidney source for you. You'll get better soon. When you get better, we'll get married and we'll have lots and lots of babies." Jasper stammered as he spoke, crying and laughing at the same time, looking like he was crazy. Until Kyla stretched out her hand to him. "Brother, I'm so cold. Come and pick me up quickly." Jasper wiped away his tears and stood up. Okay, brother is coming to pick you up." But just after Kyla was picked up by Jasper, Kyla pushed Jasper down with great force. My heart almost jumped out of my chest. No, Jasper's parents rushed out immediately. Kyla walked up to me. I asked her, "I thought you would jump down with him." Kyla sneered, "It's not worth sacrificing my life for such a scumbag. Anyway, there's no surveillance here. Even if his parents take me to court, without evidence, what can they do?" Jasper survived the fall from the rooftop by accident, but his legs were amputated and he became a cripple. Jasper's parents sold their house and car in order to cure Jasper and finally moved into a cramped rental house with Jasper. But just at this time, Kyla sued Jasper and his parents for rape and intentional imprisonment and sent them to prison. Even though Jasper's parents didn't serve a long prison term, Jasper was actually sentenced to several years in prison. I heard that Kyla used the money that Jasper had given her in the past 5 years to bribe people in the prison, and Jasper's life in there was particularly comfortable. As for Vivian, she was afraid that I would deal with her in the same way as I did with Jasper. So she deliberately went back to her parents who had abandoned her. She originally intended to seek help and avoid me, but instead, she was sold by her parents to a local old bachelor who didn't have a wife. Several times she tried to escape, but as a result, one of her legs was broken. Once she even called me, begging me to save her. I just said, beating is a sign of affection, and scolding is a sign of love. Beating and scolding together is true love. Isn't this the faithful love you've always longed for? I hung up the phone with a smile and then continued the next trip with my parents. The end. On the third day after I ran away from my wedding, my fiancé committed suicide in our new house, and left all his estate to me. When I was packing up his belongings, I saw the walls covered with pictures of me and the mottled bloodstains on the floor. His assistant told me, "Sir has been in love with you for many years. His depression was very serious. Only when he saw you or thought of you could he feel a little better." Every single thing was shocking, suffocating, and somehow made me feel sad. So when I got a second chance, facing the arrangement of running away from the wedding made by my childhood sweetheart, I refused with a smile. I'm not leaving. I wanted to see how silly the man who loved me as if his life depended on it could be. Victor died on the third day after I ran away from my wedding. My father and brother told him about my running away from the wedding with apologetic looks on their faces. Just as they walked out of the manor, they received the news that Victor had cut his wrists and committed suicide. He died after the rescue failed. In the will that had been made long ago, he left all his property to me. I was in North America at that time. When I received my brother's call, my expression gradually became rigid. In my eyes, Victor was a bastard who suddenly came to force me into marriage. I didn't know him at all. But looking at all these things, it seemed that he had been in love with me for many years. I hurried back to my country at the request of the lawyer and stiffly took Victor's urn. His background was a mystery and he had no relatives. His assistant looked at the square box sadly and told me softly, "Sir has been in love with you for many years. His depression was very serious. Only when he saw you or thought of you could he feel a little better. I thought that after you got married to him he wouldn't be so pessimistic anymore. But I didn't expect." His voice stopped. There was no blame in his tone, but my heart somehow tightened. The assistant gave me a key. "This is the manor that Sir prepared for you. It's also the new house that he decorated with his own hands. It was the place where he committed suicide." The manor was very large. There was even a racecourse built on the green lawn. The style was my favorite royal blue. The furniture and decorations were all to my liking. There was a room filled with pictures of me. I carefully identified them. From my sophomore year in college until now, almost every moment I had been under this man's surveillance cameras. There were mottled bloodstains left by cutting wrists on the floor, giving off a slight fishy smell. Every single thing was shocking, suffocating, and somehow made me feel sad. I couldn't help but get angry again. He liked me. Why didn't he say so? He barged into my house like a robber and proposed a marriage alliance at the very beginning. How could I marry him without worry? Now that things had turned out like this, did he want me to feel guilty and blame myself and never forget him for the rest of my life? Dream on. I donated all the estate including that villa. The pictures on the wall were torn down by the cleaning aunt and casually thrown on the floor, covering the bloodstains. Victor's short yet legendary life had completely disappeared from this world. I spent 3 days accepting the fact that I was reborn. 3 days ago, Victor had just come to my house and forcefully demanded a marriage alliance, almost using coercion. My childhood sweetheart heard about it and without hesitation told me to run away and go to North America to avoid the trouble for a couple of days. In my previous life, that's exactly what I did. But in this life, thinking of the walls full of pictures and the terrifying mottled bloodstains on the floor, I calmly shook my head. I don't want to leave. I said, I'm going to find him and ask clearly why he wanted to marry me. Victor had a very successful business. When I went to find him, he was still in a meeting. His assistant came down to pick me up in person and asked me to wait in the office for a while. Boss will be down soon. I gently said, Indeed, Victor came down very quickly. Before I could finish drinking a cup of tea, he walked over in a hurry, fastening the loose cufflinks as he walked. When he saw me, he stopped in his tracks and calmly called out, Grace. His expression was cold and distant, as if he was looking at a stranger. I was left speechless by his indifference. After thinking for a while, I asked him softly, My father said that you wanted to marry me. Why? I just wanted to marry you. There's no reason. How was I supposed to respond to that? I slowly stood up and picked up my bag, then I'll leave first. Victor's expression changed slightly, and a rare look of astonishment appeared on his face. You're leaving already? I looked at him expressionlessly, which made his face gradually turn pale and his whole body seemed to be covered with a sense of self-abandonment. But he still stepped aside to let me out. If I wasn't sure that this man liked me, I would really think that he was just playing with me. I sighed and took the initiative to grab his sleeve. How about we have a meal together? The way Victor and I got along made his assistant very nervous. When I left, the assistant kept apologizing to me, Boss isn't good at chatting with girls. Grace, please don't be angry with him. I'm not angry. I smiled and told him, I quite like his appearance. It suits my taste. The office door wasn't closed. Through the small crack, I clearly saw Victor touch his own face with a stunned look on his face. I smiled slightly and said to the assistant, I've invited your boss to have dinner tonight. Remember to remind him not to stand me up. The assistant nodded hurriedly as if I would change my mind in the next second. I walked out of the company gate on my high heels. As soon as I went out, I received a call from my childhood sweetheart. Looking at the note, Brother Liam, on the phone, I calmly hung up and stared blankly at the clouds in the sky. Liam was very kind to me and really cared about me. But whether it was a childhood sweetheart or a friend, they would eventually disappear in the long journey of life. Just like in my previous life. He got a lover and had children, and learned to avoid suspicion with me. So even when I was trapped in the deep mountains with the exploration team at the end and called him, I was ridiculed by his wife, who called me an old woman who couldn't get married. When his wife was scolding me, Liam was right beside her, silent. I died there in the end, and I didn't know what he thought about it. In the evening, Victor came very early. The atmosphere during the meal was also very cold. I tried hard to find topics to talk about, but he was like a topic-ending machine. He couldn't get excited no matter what was said. I was a bit tired and put the knife and fork heavily on the table. Victor, your acting like this makes me feel that you don't want to build a family with me. Victor's Adam's apple bobbed, and he lowered his head to apologize. Sorry. You know that's not what I want to hear. I was really helpless. You've been in charge of the company for so many years and have hardly ever lost in negotiations. Your insight into people's hearts should be flawless. But now you're like this. It makes me feel that you're not interested in me. Victor's face was a bit pale. He pinched his palm tightly with his fingertips and blood was faintly visible. Don't think too much. He said, I've never been so close to you before, so I'm a bit not used to it. His sudden words that seemed like a confession surprised me. His nervousness and loneliness, as well as the blood pinched out from his palm, didn't seem fake. Suddenly, I remembered what his assistant said in my previous life. Sir's depression was very serious. Only when he saw you could he feel a little better. Victor. Suddenly, I was very curious and asked him straightforwardly, did we know each other before? Victor's thin lips trembled. His eyes subconsciously dodged and he turned his head facing the transparent glass window of the restaurant. Yes. When? I asked again, but Victor shut his mouth tightly and refused to say anything no matter what. I was a bit disappointed and started to eat my steak, no longer looking for topics to chat about. Victor didn't say anything either, and he didn't seem to feel that the atmosphere was wrong. He just stared blankly at my lips and neck. His eyes followed the swallowed red wine and slowly moved down to my throat, and then he stopped because of good manners. I glared at him. He turned his head in a panic, his face a bit pale, and accidentally bit his lip, revealing bright red blood. I was helpless. If you want to look at me, just look directly. Don't be sneaky. We're going to get married soon, Victor. Could you please do something above board? He took so many pictures of me, had so many people watching me, and it seemed that he even bribed my family's nanny. If he hadn't died so miserably in my previous life, I would have called the police long ago and accused him of being a pervert. But his assistant also said that Victor was sick. We should be more patient with patients. I took the initiative to hold his hand. Ignoring his instantly rigid expression, I dipped a tissue in water and gently wiped the bloodstains on his palm. Your hands are so nice. Don't pinch them anymore, okay? Victor didn't answer me. He just stared at my eyebrows and eyes. After a long while, he asked me in a low voice, "Are you willing to marry me now? Did you give me the option of being unwilling?" His Adam's apple bobbed. "Actually, if you don't want to, you can. Run away from the wedding? Or find you, point at your nose and scold you, saying that I definitely won't marry you." I stared into his eyes. "I can do that, but Victor, what would happen to you?" The result was obvious. He would die. In my previous life, I didn't understand how weak and incompetent a person had to be so afraid to even meet in person and end his own life so casually just because of the news of my running away from the wedding. But somehow, I couldn't bear his death. Victor was undoubtedly a genius. He had a sharp eye, but his background was a mystery. His rivals dug as deep as they could but still couldn't find out his background. They could only watch helplessly as he seized the opportunity of the internet boom and soared to great heights. With ease, he put great pressure on the old noble families in Jiangcheng. But such a person committed suicide for a woman at the prime of his life. In my previous life, Victor became the laughingstock of the world and was labeled as the #1 love-struck fool. Under the deliberate hype of his rivals, he was cursed with the most unpleasant words. I didn't want all this to happen again. On the way home, I thought about a lot of things with my mind blank. Finally, looking at Victor, who was driving expressionlessly beside me, I decided to have a chat with his assistant in a couple of days. I really didn't know how to get along with this guy. And also, his illness. Was there really no way to deal with it? The black Rolls-Royce stopped in front of my villa. Coincidentally, we met Liam, who was carrying pastries and coming over. Victor narrowed his eyes. "Do you want to go down and say hello?" I turned my head and asked him. "Liam is a very good friend of mine." "No need." Victor leaned over and unbuckled my seatbelt for me. "You can go home." Although I said there was no need, my heart suddenly felt cold and a sense of bitterness welled up inside me, as if I had swallowed something bitter. I grabbed his wrist. "He and I are really just friends. Don't think too much." "I won't." "Really?" I turned my head and saw that he was gripping the steering wheel tightly, with his veins faintly showing. I reached out and touched his fingertips. "If there's anything, could you please tell me? Don't keep it to yourself. It will be very troublesome when we get along." Forced by me, Victor's Adam's apple bobbed. He turned his head to look elsewhere and said slowly, "I don't really like him." "Then just don't get along with him." I touched his head as if to encourage him. "He's just my friend. You don't have to force yourself to like him. And in the future, we'll be husband and wife, a relationship much closer than with him. If you mind my relationship with him, I'll also pay attention and keep a distance from him in the future." Victor was a bit surprised. "You'll stay away from him for me?" "Why not?" I looked at Victor with a smile and said softly, "We're husband and wife after all." Victor was stunned and somehow looked a bit silly. I seized the opportunity and moved closer to him, telling him, "Look, we can solve problems only by talking about them, right? What you're not satisfied with about me or what you want to say to me, you must tell me. Don't keep it in your heart and make yourself so angry while I don't know anything." How unfair. I could probably sense that Victor didn't know how to handle intimate relationships. He used the negotiation skills in the business world and relationships, forced my family into a marriage alliance, and when I took the initiative to come to him, he was at a loss and didn't know how to respond. He was really a novice in relationships and it was a bit scary. It doesn't matter, I thought, I can teach him slowly. Liam watched me get out of Victor's car, his eyes narrowing and his expression turning a bit unfriendly. After the car drove away, Liam walked up to me. "Have you decided to marry him? He's good-looking, wealthy, has a good reputation in the circle and no scandals. Why not marry him?" But he stopped halfway through his sentence. He seemed a bit flustered, a bit chaotic, with a touch of anger and impatience. Finally, he managed to choke out a dry sentence. "Are you sure you like him? In this circle, how many marriages are based on love?" I shrugged. "He's a suitable match." Liam's eyes widened. "Could he be better than the two of us?" "Liam." I interrupted him with a cold face. "I'm getting married. Let's not say some things that might cause misunderstandings." After saying that, I walked towards home without paying attention to him. To be honest, even though I got a second chance at life, I still couldn't figure out Liam's attitude towards me. When he was nice, he was extremely nice. He would run all over the small towns in Northern Europe just to buy me a necklace. But when he was bad, he was really bad. He still can't even remember my birthday up to now. In my previous life, I mentioned an arranged marriage to him but he refused. He said he wanted to play around for a couple more years. As a result, when he was making a snowman in St. Petersburg, he fell in love with a simple and lovely girl at first sight. They got married and had a child in less than 3 months. His wife was very jealous of my existence, and I was sensible enough to never contact him again. But I didn't expect that it would be a farewell forever. Liam should have been a bit sad when he heard about my death. After all, when his biological father and stepmother slapped him because of his younger brother, I sat on the rooftop with him and counted the stars all night. When I went to find Victor the next day, he was still in a meeting. Through the transparent glass window, I saw his serious look with his brows tightly furrowed, and his suit seemed to carry a bit more of a fierce aura. I waited in the lounge and chatted with his assistant by the way. His assistant was very tight-lipped and kept beating around the bush with me. Even when I pointed out his illness clearly, he just pretended to be deaf and dumb and acted as if he didn't know. I was really helpless. "Don't you think it would be best for his state if you told me clearly?" "But Mr. Victor doesn't want you to know. He said, he hopes that he will always be perfect in your eyes." He hinted to me meaningfully, "Mr. Victor really hopes that you can rely on him." "What are you talking about?" Victor walked in after the meeting. He was pulling at his tie as he walked, looking a bit tired. "I was wondering if you're so good-looking because you've had plastic surgery." I leaned on the sofa and looked at him with a smile. "But your assistant said you haven't." "What a pity. I can't compare to Victor's bone structure no matter what." Victor was stunned. The assistant had already left tactfully and closed the door behind him. The lounge was extremely quiet, and I could hear the rustling sound of Victor's suit fabric. His voice was hoarse. "Do you like this appearance? Is that something so surprising?" I raised my eyebrows. Could it be that Victor has no awareness of his own beauty? The back of his ears turned slightly red, and he turned his face away in embarrassment, not looking at me anymore. "By the way, is it too formal for me to still call you Victor?" I walked up to him and reached out to touch his head. He must have sprayed some hairspray on it. The texture felt a bit dull and not so nice. I bent down and leaned close to his ear. "Can I call you brother, okay?" Victor pushed me away suddenly. He got angry all of a sudden. I couldn't figure out why he was angry, just like I couldn't figure out why he liked me. He sat behind the desk with his back to me, and there was a strong sense of hostility in his voice. "Leave. But I still want to have a meal with you." "No need." Victor refused me without hesitation. I have something to do at noon. What was this guy up to? I looked him up and down and said slowly, all right then. Pay attention to the time. You can't skip meals. I picked up my bag and walked out. I waited outside the door for a moment. Amid the nervous look of the assistant, I heard the sound of something being smashed and Victor's painful low growl. I deliberately left the door ajar. His painful and desperate low growl came out along with the sound of glass breaking. I knocked on the assistant's desk in front of me with a serious expression. Are you still planning to tell me nothing? He hesitated, but I ignored him and pushed the door open and walked straight in. Victor became extremely embarrassed. He was huddled in the corner with his knees hugged, sitting on a pile of broken glass. His fingertips were covered in blood. I didn't know if he scratched them himself or if they were cut by the glass. I walked over on the broken glass. The heels of my high heels ground slowly on the jagged broken pieces, making a harsh rustling sound. Victor lowered his head in panic, his body trembling. He refused to look at me no matter what. I touched his shoulder with my fingertips. What's wrong with you? He was too big and heavy. For a man over 1.8 meters tall, I couldn't even hug him properly. I could only squat beside him and carefully pick out the glass shards from his palm with tweezers. Victor lifted his head at this moment and stared at me. After a while, he said to me in a hoarse voice, "It's ugly, isn't it?" "What? Your hands?" I was stunned for a moment. Staring at the slender fingers in front of me with just a thin layer of skin and flesh, I couldn't help muttering to myself that this guy really had no self-awareness. "They're very nice." I was helpless and bent down to gently kiss his fingertips. "They're really nice." However, Victor still wasn't very happy. He asked me, "Did you say the same thing to your exes before?" "What?" "Flattering me, being nice to me, calling me brother. Did your exes all have these kinds of treatment?" I fell into an eerie silence. So that's why he went crazy just now. I thought it was because he had a younger sister in his original family or something, and that's why he was so affected by the word brother. Turns out it was just his lovesickness acting up. How could such a powerful and capable person be tortured so badly by his feelings? I touched his head and sighed softly. Silly guy. I've had quite a few relationships. After all, I'm good-looking and from a good family. There were many people chasing me, and it was inevitable that I had a few crushes. However, in families like ours, dating and getting married are different things. My father told me a long time ago that I could date whoever I wanted, but when it was time, I had to come back and get married in an arranged way. I helped him stand up and sat him on the sofa. Then I asked the cleaner to come in and clean up the floor and poured him a glass of warm water. I was busy taking care of things. Victor held down my hand. "You don't need to do these things." I sat down following his strength and thought to myself. This guy must have already found out clearly how many ex-boyfriends I had. I used to be playful and did a lot of crazy things. If he minds these, there's nothing I can do. Don't contact them again in the future. Victor's sudden words interrupted my thoughts. I turned my head to look at him and saw his serious expression. I reached out and scratched his wrist. "Are you ordering me?" His body suddenly tensed up, and his breathing became shallow. It was as if he suddenly realized something and nervously turned his head away. "If you want to contact them, you should tell me in advance. Otherwise, I got it." I interrupted him. "I won't contact them again." I asked him again, "Were you so angry just now because of my exes?" Victor didn't say anything. I was a bit helpless. "If there's anything, could you please tell me? I'm really tired when you don't say anything, get angry for no reason, and smash things. I don't even know how to comfort you." "So, did all your exes do better than me?" Victor suddenly interrupted me. His eyes were full of bloodshot. The tone in which he questioned me was as childish as a child's. How did things come to this? I clearly wanted to have a good chat with him. I sat up straight and asked him helplessly. "If you mind these things, there's nothing I can do. I don't think having a few relationships is a big sin. The past is in the past. Why are you still dwelling on it?" "Victor, Will it really make you happy to dig into these things and ask about them clearly? Alright, then I'll tell you. I did have relationships before, and when I was with them, I really liked them wholeheartedly. Did you feel happy hearing these? Victor's eyes became even redder, and he seemed on the verge of crying. Seeing that I stood up, he anxiously tried to grab my sleeve, but I gently brushed him away. His voice also sounded a bit confused. Once I thought that as long as I cooperated with you well, we could get along well. But now I realize that I can't adapt to your way of thinking at all. Looking at his red eyes, I slowed down my tone. When you're with me, you don't seem happy either, and you even hurt yourself. Victor, how about we break off our engagement? No. Victor looked at me firmly, raising his pair of red eyes and tightly gripping my arm, repeating over and over again. No breaking off the engagement. My face was extremely close to his, so close that I could see the fine hairs on his cheeks. With his pitiful tone, it really seemed like I was bullying a child. I absent-mindedly rubbed his hair and asked him again. So tell me, why on earth do you want to marry me? Victor's eyes flickered, and he subconsciously turned his head away. I pinched his chin. Tell me, Victor, brother, tell me. I stared at him without blinking. I don't want to be an ignorant fool. His eyelashes trembled, and his voice was hesitant. I want to marry you. Why do you want to marry me? His eyes were filled with tears. He blinked and looked at me, as if begging, yet finding it hard to say. I said it for him. You like me, right? Silly guy, why can't you say it? I rubbed his cheeks and wanted to stand up, but he grabbed me and pressed me onto the sofa. The originally gentle appearance was torn apart. He put his arms around my shoulders and cried softly. He said, I'm so disgusting like this, right? Is it very annoying that a disgusting person like me likes you? I looked at him in disbelief. What was going on in this guy's mind? Disgusting? Annoying? Doesn't he know that he's ranked first on the list of the most desirable men to marry on the internet? How could a person like him be so self-abased? I seemed to have caught a glimpse of something. I held his face and forced him to lift it up, then wiped away the tears from the corners of his eyes. When my friends heard that I could marry you, they were all envious. They said that I must have accumulated the luck of 8 lifetimes to be able to marry you. Why is it such an embarrassing thing in your eyes? He buried his head in my neck and shoulder and didn't say anything. But at least he stopped crying. I patted his back and sighed slightly. Brother, could you please have a bit more confidence in yourself? The entire 32-story office building is your property. Whoever sees you outside would respectfully call you boss. You're so good looking. Even if I fell in love with you, wouldn't it be quite normal? Victor's body trembled slightly. He asked in a low voice, a bit unbelievingly, you like me? Otherwise? Do you think a girl would come to find you every day for no reason, just because she has nothing better to do? I patted his back and told him gently, brother, girls won't waste their time on people they're not interested in. You should also be a bit more confident. You're great, really great. We'll be very happy in the future. Trust me. Victor started crying again. Tears soaked my collar, warm and with a bit of a tingling sensation. You can't lie to me. I won't lie to you. My heart melted completely. I gently touched his earlobe, feeling the warmth and dampness on my neck and the thumping of my heart. Perhaps among all my exes, there has never been anyone like him. It's quite novel, I thought. Victor's inner self is too fragile. A single sentence, a single word, or an attitude of mine can easily make him break down. This kind of situation shouldn't have appeared on a boss of a listed company. But the truth is so strange and absurd. He stood up awkwardly, his cheeks blushing deeply, yet he was used to keeping a cold face. Looking at me, he asked softly, are you hungry? A little bit. I stood up, straightened my wrinkled clothes, and pulled them down to cover the exposed part of my waist. Victor looked away, his face as red as a ripe apple, which made me feel a bit sympathetic. So innocent? This guy is almost 30. Could it be that he hasn't experienced that yet? I held back my speculation in my heart and lazily made a request to him. Ask your assistant to bring some food up. I don't want to move. Okay. Victor went out to tell his assistant something. I watched his tall and straight figure against the light and gestured to measure the length of his legs. I increasingly felt that his proportions were amazingly good. Good-looking, with a great figure, rich, and not promiscuous. If it weren't for that mental problem, he probably wouldn't have been with me in 8 lifetimes. I sighed. A large part of the reason for Victor's poor mental state is insomnia. His assistant told me extremely embarrassed that on many nights Victor slept with my photo in his arms. I didn't ask him where he got the photo. The assistant was relieved because of that. When I went back to Victor and stared at him working for quite a while, his ears turned red and he couldn't concentrate. He put down the document in his hand and asked, "Am I that good looking?" I subconsciously nodded. After a while, I remembered my real intention. "Can I go to your house to have a look? The new house you prepared?" Victor was stunned for a moment. "Why do you suddenly want to go there?" "I just want to have a look. After all, it's the place where we'll live in the future." He had never refused my requests. After hearing this, he just nodded and added, "If there's anything you're not satisfied with, tell me." When I walked into that elegant and noble manor again, I couldn't help but my eyes became moist. It was brightly lit here. The sunlight slanted in and shone on me, warm and comfortable. Unlike in my previous life, it was so cold and gloomy that I wanted to run away. I quietly glanced at the room on the far right of the second floor, which was locked. I knew that inside were all my photos and the oil paintings he copied. Obviously, it was my face, with a black mole at the corner of my eye. I silently followed Victor into the bedroom. Inside, there were big red sheets and bedding with a big character, "She," meaning happiness in Chinese for wedding, printed on them. Standing beside the bed, I felt like laughing and crying at the same time. Finally, I pulled Victor's sleeve beside me and asked him, "Do you really want to marry me that much?" "Yes." His Adam's apple bobbed. "Is there anything you're not satisfied with?" "No, everything is great." I pulled him to sit on the bed. "When did you start preparing?" "In the past few days." He skillfully stretched out his fingers for me to play with, so obedient that it was incurable. Because of my protest, he didn't use hair gel now. His bangs softly clung to his forehead, looking a bit less fierce and a bit softer. In the adjacent room was the place where he committed suicide in his previous life, with blood splattered all over the floor. But now, he hugged me, with his chin resting on the top of my head, looking gentle and content, like a fierce beast that had eaten its fill and was lazily lying on the lawn to soak up the sun. Has his fate been changed by me? The wedding date is approaching. I went to find him every day and didn't leave until very late. My father scolded me several times for being too forward. But Victor seemed quite happy. He ate a bit more and gained some weight. His slender fingers had a bit more flesh on them. Once, when I was about to go to him, I saw Liam waiting downstairs in the company. As soon as he came up, he grabbed me. "You've been bewitched by him. I'll take you away. Let's go to North America." "Are you crazy?" I shook him off in disbelief. "Think whatever you want, but I can't let you sink deeper like this anymore." Liam gritted his teeth. "You don't like him, Grace. You're just curious. You can't waste your whole life like this. Whether I like him or not has nothing to do with you." I felt strange. "Don't you think you're being too nosy?" Liam opened his eyes full of bloodshot and suddenly his face was filled with grief. "You don't like him, Grace. You're just curious. You can't waste your whole life like this. Whether I like him or not has nothing to do with you." He looked so wretched as if he had been beaten. His suit was wrinkled and clung to his body. He begged for my pity in a panic. I remembered what my best friend told me when Liam got married in my previous life. If you had been the one who got married first, he would definitely go crazy. What's so great about love at first sight, being simple and cute? How could it compare to the bond between you and him before? He's just taking advantage of the fact that you haven't been interested in men all these years and that he's your only male friend, so he's been so wanton and promiscuous. Liam. I called him with a complicated look and raised my hand to pat the dust off his shoulder. "Go back. I'll pretend I didn't hear what you said today. I'm getting married." In the future, you should also be careful, or people will misunderstand, and it'll be hard to explain. He stared at me in a panic and then shed tears. He murmured in a low voice, "Did I really lose all chances just because of a moment of mistake? We're friends." I used the words he answered me with in my previous life to reply to him. "If you want, we can be friends for a lifetime." When I pushed the door open and went in, Victor was sitting on the sofa, with a gloomy aura all over him. "Why are you so late today?" "I met a friend downstairs and chatted for a while." I put the snacks I brought on the table and turned to see that he still looked gloomy. I felt a bit strange. "What's wrong with you?" Victor looked up at me, and his voice somehow sounded a bit aggrieved. "How was the chat with Liam?" "How did you know?" I wanted to ask him how he knew, but then I remembered the bunch of people he had arranged around me and thought it wasn't necessary. I told him the truth. "He came to find me and said he wanted to take me away." A dark look flashed in Victor's eyes. I patted his shoulder, leaned against his body, and said lazily, "But I refused him. I said I wanted to stay by your side." Victor slowly said, "Oh. Aren't you going to praise me?" He turned his head away. "Is there anything worth praising about that? I showed my loyalty to you in front of another man." I pinched him in dissatisfaction and pretended to be angry. "How can you not show any response?" Victor's Adam's apple bobbed. He looked at me blankly and helplessly. After a while, he got up and took a box from the drawer. He opened it, and inside was a huge blue crystal necklace. I felt it was a bit familiar. "Is it the one from the auction in Hong Kong?" "Yes." I couldn't help laughing. The necklace was nice and valuable, but Victor spent 300 million yuan on it. The news headline that night was, "The sucker who spent 300 million yuan on a necklace." "Why did you buy this?" "You like blue," he said in a low voice. "I think it suits you very well." "Thank you, brother." I hugged his neck and rubbed my cheek against his. "The auction was 2 months ago. Why did you take it out today? You seemed unhappy today." He said in a low voice, "I originally planned to give it to you on your birthday, but I thought it could make you happy now." "When am I not?" I remembered the words when I pretended to be angry just now and shut my mouth. Feeling a bit amused, this guy really couldn't tell the difference between a girl being truly angry and just pretending to be angry. I poked his face. "I'm not angry, really, but I'm still happy now. Brother, I really like you more and more." Victor's cheeks turned slightly red. He picked me up and sat me on his lap, and carefully kissed my forehead. To be honest, except for that time when he lost control, I hardly noticed Victor's illness. When facing me, he's just a normal person who's a bit slow in terms of feelings and doesn't quite understand girls. But his assistant reminded me again and again, asking me not to stimulate him. I couldn't help asking, "Has his condition gotten worse these days?" "No." The assistant said hesitantly, "Sir's mood has actually improved a lot. He doesn't need sleeping pills at night anymore." "Then why have you been bothering me?" "Sir has become better because of your closeness. If you get tired of him and leave, the consequences will be really serious." He begged me, "I don't know what your intention is for getting close to Sir, but please don't leave casually. Sir will really go crazy. And he'll die." I added that in my heart. I patted his shoulder. "Don't worry. I care about him more than you do. I'm not a savior, nor a professional psychologist. I can only try my best to make Victor less sad. I hope he can be a bit happier. When he's in a good mood, other aspects won't be bad either." I was a bit surprised when Victor's father came to find me. After all, it was the first time I had heard of his family. His father was from the capital city. Dressed in a suit and tie like Victor, he had a similar appearance but a completely different temperament. He was so sinister that I found him terrifying. As soon as he came up, he told me straightforwardly, "Grace, I hope you'll leave my son." I was a bit confused when I heard that. I picked up the teacup and took a sip of water, then asked calmly, "Then how much money can you give me?" 200 million yuan. It's enough for your family to get through this crisis." I paused for a moment. Actually, I didn't even know that my family was in a crisis. I quietly observed him for a while and then said decisively, "We're truly in love. You'll have to offer more money. A necklace that Victor bought for me cost 300 million yuan. Your price isn't enough to tempt me." He sneered. "Do you think it's a good thing to stay by his side?" He looked at me with a sarcastic smile. "You haven't contacted your ex-boyfriends, have you? Go and find out how many of them are still alive. And that Liam, do you think Victor will let him off? And your brother, do you think just because you're related by blood, he'll be okay? I'm telling you, Victor won't spare him either. Your love is so great. All the people around you suffer and you're kept in the dark like a fool knowing nothing. Isn't it ridiculous?" I frowned, and a look of disgust appeared in my eyes. "I believe in Victor. He's not that kind of person. Whether he is or not, you can just go and check it out." He smiled confidently. "They say the son takes after the father. The means I used on his mother back then will definitely be used on you by him without any change. Do you believe it or not? Then your wife shouldn't be by your side now, right?" "No, on the contrary, we're living a very happy life now." He smiled, looking smug. She couldn't escape and resigned herself to her fate. She still has living family members and couldn't bear to leave everything and go away. She's very obedient and docile now, waiting for me at home every day. She's soft and gentle, with all her claws and sharp edges cut off, tamed to rely on me, as docile as a bird in a cage. I woke up with a start. It was just a dream. The north wind was howling against the window glass, breaking my days. Only then did I realize that my back was covered in cold sweat. I had never met anyone as annoying as Victor's father in my life. Whenever I thought of his smug, taming theory, I felt so disgusted that I wanted to vomit. It was still afternoon, and I had taken a nap for nearly 3 hours. I turned on my phone, and there were 16 missed calls from Victor on it. I called him back, but before I could say anything, I was interrupted by Victor's urgent and anxious voice. "Why didn't you answer my calls? Did you meet him? What did he say to you? Do you not want me anymore, want to leave, want to break off the engagement, want to break up with me?" "Stop guessing." I helplessly interrupted him. "I didn't. I just fell asleep and didn't answer your calls. Don't think too much." Victor was silent, and his breathing was a bit heavy. After a while, he said to me in a pitiful voice, "Grace, I'm scared." His voice was so sad and pitiful that my sympathy overflowed. "Don't be scared." I sighed. "Although he's your father, he's just a stranger to me. I still trust you more. Do you understand?" Victor didn't answer me. He just said in a very soft voice, "Grace, I want to see you." Victor came to pick me up at my home. As soon as I got in the car, he immediately pulled me over and held me on his lap. He hugged me tightly, buried his head in my neck, and pleaded with a sob, "Don't believe him. Don't believe a single word he said. Okay?" I patted his back and replied simply, "I only believe you." Victor lifted his head, and there were teardrops on his eyelashes. Under my guidance, he could now express his emotions freely in front of me. Whether he was feeling wronged, sad, or something else, he knew to tell me instead of keeping it to himself. "Just like now," he said gloomily, "could you please not meet him again in the future? I was really scared today. When you didn't answer my calls, I felt like I was really going to die." "Don't say that word." I covered his mouth. "You will surely live a long life." Victor's emotions were interrupted, and he was a bit stunned for a moment. I rubbed his head, and the corners of my lips curved slightly. "If you don't want me to meet him, then I won't. Anyway, it was only because of you that I met him in the first place. Brother, you should be more confident in yourself." I held his hand tightly. "I don't believe a single word others say about you. I only believe what I see and hear and what you tell me. You're really an outstanding person, brother. You're amazing. You must also be more confident, understand?" Victor was very self-abased. I didn't know what he had experienced in the past that made him so self-abased and timid, especially in relationships. He was always as panicked as a headless fly, feeling that he didn't deserve anyone's love. These days, whenever I got the chance, I would praise him, from his appearance to his knowledge, from his wealth to his status. I even praised his fingernails for being especially cute. Only when one is confident enough will one not be like a frightened bird, living in constant fear. I hoped that Victor could relax and be happy in this intimate relationship, instead of being constantly on edge, thinking about whether I would be angry and how to please me. How tiring that would be. Brother, I'm an adult and have my own judgment. I won't change my opinion of you just because of a casual word from him. I bent down and hugged Victor's shoulders. I like you, and I can speak up. If there's anything, I'll ask. I definitely won't leave. And you're so outstanding. I don't want to give you up to others for nothing. Victor's eyes sparkled like diamonds, shining brightly. Compared to when I first met him, now the cold temperament on him was obviously a bit less, and he had more human touch. He no longer seemed like a rotten log that could die at any time. My existence had finally had a real impact on him. I could probably guess that Victor's original family had brought him a lot of pain. But when he hugged me and whispered that he didn't like his name, I was still a bit surprised. He hated me for coming between him and my mother, so he gave me this name hoping that I would die early. Moo? Does it mean the sun setting in the west? Since he was born, his father had wanted him to die. How could there be such a person? My heart felt a bit bitter. I held his hand. But your mother loves you. She doesn't love me. Victor said with a bitter smile. She was just held back by me. She's a very traditional woman. Even though she received a higher education, she stubbornly believed that women should assist their husbands and teach their children. After I was born, all her rebellions became empty. Out of a sense of responsibility, she couldn't bear to abandon me, but on her own, she couldn't give me a prosperous material life. So she was forced to resign herself to her fate. When he said these things, his tone was very flustered and chaotic, and his eyes were red and watery, as if covered with a layer of mist. I felt a bit heartbroken seeing him like that. But none of this is your fault. The consequences of what your father did shouldn't be borne by you. Feeling the temperature of his chest, I told him very seriously. Brother, you're great and outstanding. Your mother will surely be proud of you now. Victor smiled bitterly. He stroked my head. Only you will always think I'm good. So, Grace, I only have you. He hugged me tightly, rested his chin on top of my head, and pleaded with me very seriously, you mustn't abandon me. Otherwise, I'll go crazy. When I opened my mailbox and saw a bunch of harassing emails, for a moment, I wanted to meet that person. How much hatred did he have to be so intolerant of his son's happiness and be so determined to destroy it? I took a deep breath. Most of the contents of the emails were threats, or they attached photos of my exes, saying how miserable their current situations were, and then earnestly advised me to stay away from Victor. I didn't even look at them and directly deleted those emails. Recently, I had been busy preparing for the wedding and was really stressed out by the guest list on my side of the family. I had less contact with Victor. So when I received a call from his assistant in the evening, saying anxiously that he had committed suicide, I didn't react for a moment. After a while, I felt as if I had fallen into an ice cellar. Before Victor committed suicide, he had just met his father. I don't know what that man said to him to stimulate his fragile nerves. As soon as he left, Victor cut his wrists. Fortunately, he was discovered in time. At the door of the emergency room, I hugged my shawl and squatted on the ground against the wall. My teeth couldn't help trembling. How could there be such a father? He must have known that Victor's mental state was very fragile, yet he didn't hesitate and cruelly pushed him to the brink of death. When Victor was pushed out, there was an IV drip on his hand and his face was as pale as paper. All the good complexion that he had managed to build up these days was completely gone. I sat on the chair beside the bed, stared blankly at him for a long time until he woke up. As soon as he woke up and saw me, his voice was hoarse and he called my name, Grace. I ignored him, got up and went out to call the doctor. After the doctor took away the IV drip, I stood beside the bed, stared at his pale face without saying a word, which made him scared. He said in a panicked way, if you're unhappy, just scold me or hit me. Don't be like this, Grace. Don't ignore me. He seemed to be very afraid of the cold shoulder. Every time I put on a straight face and ignored him, he would be as panicked as a child who hadn't grown up, pulling my sleeve and begging for forgiveness. But this time, I didn't plan to give in to him. I ignored him for a whole day, watching him at a loss, falling into confusion and self-abandonment. The scar on his wrist was hideous and was broken open by him several times, continuing to bleed. Even the doctor couldn't help but persuade me, "Please consider the patient's mood first." "I know," I said softly, "don't worry." Back in the ward, Victor was in a daze, staring blankly at the window with a lost look in his eyes. He was so fragile and dejected, like a body without a soul. "Victor." I stood 3 meters away and called him softly, without any emotion in my tone. He seemed to realize something, closed his eyes painfully and refused to answer me. But I didn't care about his avoidance and told him straightforwardly, "Let's break off the engagement." Smack. The vase on the bedside table shattered. For an instant, his face contorted with rage, but quickly turned to a look of dejection and extreme despair. He called out to me hoarsely, "Grace." He tried to scramble down to me with his hands and feet, and the wound on his wrist tore open again, with blood gushing out. I stepped forward and pressed on his wrist, then stroked his messy hair. "What do you want to do now? Lock me up like your father did, tame me until I only listen to you, or would you rather hurt yourself than lay a finger on me?" "Grace." Victor looked up at me, looking like a frightened little beast. I answered for him. "You would choose the second option, wouldn't you?" I bent down and kissed his lips, a kiss without any trace of lust but full of tenderness. When I pulled away, I pinched his cheek with my fingertips. "Brother, you're not like your father, and I'm not your mother. We won't end up like them, brother Victor, dear baby. What on earth are you afraid of?" I felt as if I could catch a glimpse of his father's state of mind a little bit. He knew that even though Victor's mother resigned herself to her fate and obediently stayed with him all her life, she wasn't happy at all. This marriage was far from as happy as he had imagined. So he couldn't bear to see Victor happy. Victor had obtained the love he wanted so easily, which made him feel like a failure and even made him fly into a rage out of humiliation. He had been constantly emphasizing to me that Victor was his son and would definitely do the same despicable things as he did. He had also been brainwashing Victor all along. I watched the surveillance footage. The last sentence he said to Victor before leaving was, "Son, just you wait and see. As long as you're alive, sooner or later you won't be able to resist and will treat her the same way I treated your mother. By then, what happened to your mother will be her future." I sneered when I saw this. So this man also knew that Victor's mother, his own wife, had a miserable life, so miserable that the possibility of other girls repeating her path became a useful threat. Victor didn't want me to become like his mother. He didn't want to hurt me and also loathed the dirty genes within himself. Under the stimulation, he didn't hesitate to choose to end his own life. "Do you feel the difference between you and him?" I squatted beside the bed and looked into Victor's eyes very seriously. "When he learned that your mother was leaving, he only resorted to coercion, threats, and even imprisonment, doing all kinds of despicable things. But you only hurt yourself." I grasped his uninjured right hand and intertwined our fingers. "Brother, do you think someone like you would hurt me?" Victor's Adam's apple bobbed, his eyes reddened, and he looked at me sadly. "But I'm afraid, Grace. You're so nice and proud. I'm afraid you'll become like my mother." "We won't." I told him again, "Brother, we'll be very happy in the future. People are essentially like fierce birds of prey, all having the most primitive and ugly desires. What's precious is that we can suppress and control them. You think that you might hurt me someday, but you've controlled that thought. You'd rather commit suicide than lay a finger on me. Brother, believe in yourself. After evolving for so many years, humans are no longer the savage beasts that lived on raw meat in the forest." I looked into his eyes. "Please believe in me too, okay? I'm not your mother and don't have the concept of the 3 obediences and 4 virtues. The only reason I'm willing to stay by your side is that I like you, really, really like you. Grace." "Brother." I repeated it and told him very seriously, "Please believe in me. I've had many relationships before and have long been indifferent to matters of the heart. I also dislike those arrogant and misogynistic men. If I hadn't met you, I probably wouldn't have fallen in love again in the future. Just like in my previous life, I died alone on an adventure trip. When I was young, I had been in too many relationships and then everything seemed dull. Until I met Victor. He really respects me and is so obedient. In front of me, he's as docile as a cat without self-awareness. From pity at the beginning to love now, everything has happened so naturally. There's no girl who wouldn't like him. I arranged to meet Victor's father. In the coffee shop, I looked at the man in a suit and tie in front of me and asked softly, "I heard that your wife used to be a diplomat." She was so impressive and heroic on the stage of international affairs. He narrowed his eyes. "Why are you talking about this? And now she can only stay at home, being a housewife. Her figure has gradually become plump, and her mind has gradually become barren. She can't keep up with the times and even makes you feel disgusted." At this time, you realize that the person you loved and were attracted to was just the energetic her back then, not this nagging and annoying old woman at home now, right? Shut up. He tried to interrupt me. I didn't listen and just smiled and told him. "And unfortunately, it was you who created this tragedy with your own hands." I don't know if he had affairs with other women, but judging from his appearance, it's likely. Once such passionate love finally dissipated under the torture of household chores. Presumably, he had regretted why everything was as he wished at first, but then nothing was perfect anymore. "Leave Victor alone," I said softly. "He's already suffered a lot because of you and your wife. Your own dissatisfaction shouldn't be vented on him. If you still remain obstinate." I smiled slightly. "Sir, I'm being polite to you now just because you're Victor's father. Once I find out that you want to harm him, I won't let you off." He didn't get angry. Instead, he slumped on the stool, looking a bit dazed. I said what he wanted to say for him. "Are you thinking that if your wife had been half as tough as I am, you two wouldn't have ended up like this? You're wrong. If I met someone like you, the final outcome would be a deadlock, and both of us would die together. Sir, with a personality like yours, any girl who falls into your hands will have a miserable life." I angered him. He suddenly stood up and raised his hand, trying to hit me. He was stopped by the bodyguards beside me, and they got into a fight with him. A 50-year-old man being pinned down and beaten by bodyguards on the ground was really embarrassing. I chuckled softly, looked at him, and repeated what I had just said. "Sir, as I said, I'm not your wife, nor a soft target that you can manipulate. I'll repeat it again. Don't approach Victor. Otherwise," I poured a cup of scalding hot coffee on his head. "I definitely won't let you off." Although I don't advocate using violence to counter violence, I have to admit that violence can indeed solve many problems. Jiangcheng is still the territory of the old and established noble families. He couldn't compete with me and could only disappear completely with hidden resentment. After Victor's and my wedding, he held me in his arms and rolled around on the wedding bed like a child, with a silly smile on his face. "Grace, Grace," he murmured as if he couldn't believe it. "I've finally married you." Silly guy. I patted his back impatiently. "You've drunk so much wine. Go take a shower." He walked into the bathroom with a silly smile. I put on the lingerie I specially bought for our wedding night and posed on the bed, waiting for him. I have to say that compared to Victor, I'm really more experienced. The moment he saw me, his eyes immediately lit up, and he rushed over like an uncivilized dog. I was exhausted, but he was still full of energy, getting close and kissing me gently. While kissing, he called me baby with a silly smile. I drifted off to sleep in a daze. That night, I had a very bad dream. I dreamed about Victor's past life. After I ran away from the arranged marriage, his father came to taunt him and said to him triumphantly, "Look, you won't be able to resist and will soon catch her and lock her up, just like what I did to your mother. Don't try to hide it. You're a greedy lunatic by nature. What happened to your mother will be her future. She'll be driven mad by you." I saw Victor painfully hugging his head, repeatedly growling in a low voice. He lay in the room full of my photos with a distorted expression on his face, repeating, "No." He didn't want to hurt me. So he resolutely chose to end his own life. I woke up from the dream with a start. My back was covered in cold sweat. When I opened my eyes, Victor was holding me with a peaceful sleeping face. I touched his handsome eyebrows and eyes, then got out of bed. Standing in front of the locked room, I took the bunch of keys that belonged to him and tried them one by one. The door opened. I stepped into a room that was almost like a nightmare. Victor's attempt at suicide was probably a form of self-destruction born out of his loathing for his own genes under great pressure. He looked at the photos of me covering the wall with blood flowing continuously from his wrist, feeling the passage of life, and his eyes slowly scanned over my smiling face. Even at the last moment of his life, his eyes were full of me. I remembered the hot search topic from my previous life. It was really right to call him the #1 love-struck fool. Until now, I still don't know where Victor's love for me came from. He didn't want to tell me. I asked him many times, but he still wouldn't say. Perhaps there should be some secrets between husband and wife. Since he didn't want to say, I stopped asking. Grace. I turned around and saw Victor, who had been sleeping, standing behind me against the light. He looked a bit dejected and asked me nervously, "Do you think I'm a pervert?" I shook my head and walked over to hold his cold hand. "Why are you awake? You weren't here." He looked so aggrieved. "The quilt is cold." I couldn't help laughing. When we first met, he had a cold and distant look on his face and didn't know how to respond to my words. But now he's already quite proficient at acting coquettishly. Whether it's a child or an adult, as long as they receive special affection, they will naturally show the coquettishness of a young animal. He realized it and then shook my sleeve, asking me carefully, "Do you think I'm a pervert?" "No, it's just a bit novel." I told the truth. "I didn't expect that you had liked me for such a long time." "You don't blame me?" "Since you like me, why should I blame you?" Victor's cheeks turned red, and he put his arms around my waist. "You're so nice to me. Does that mean you'll indulge me no matter what I do?" "I just believe that you won't do anything to harm me." I turned around and put my arms around his neck. "I believe in your character. For someone who would rather hurt himself than touch me, I don't want to speculate on him with any malicious thoughts. True love in the world is not easy to come by, and mutual love is even rarer. I cherish Victor's feelings very much, just as he cherishes me. The cub that has been favored will go crazy without hesitation once there is a risk of losing that favor. Just like Victor's attitude towards Liam now. It took me a lot of effort to stop him from throwing out the gift that Liam gave me. Liam gave me a set of pajamas that he knitted by himself. There was a very small heart embroidered on the chest, showing all kinds of tenderness and ambiguity. As soon as Victor saw it, he almost went crazy. I glared at him, and he sat on the sofa aggrievedly and didn't move. I ignored him and picked up that set of pajamas to look at it on my own. "What's so nice about it?" he muttered as he came over and hugged me. His big body enveloped mine, and his warm breath hit my neck. He was a bit dissatisfied but didn't dare to say it out loud. He could only softly call, "Darling." "All right." I held his hand with a headache and stuffed the pajamas into his hand. "You deal with it. Don't throw it away. Otherwise, it'll be so embarrassing if he finds out." So Victor cut it up, shredding it into pieces as if to vent his anger. I watched in silence for a moment and couldn't help asking, "Do you have a feud with Liam?" His movements paused for a moment, and he replied with a muffled yes. I didn't like the look of him even before. He was so close to you, yet he was still entangled with other women and wasn't faithful at all. If he had girlfriends, I probably had boyfriends too. Victor's double standards made me want to laugh a bit, but I thought it wasn't appropriate and held it back. "It doesn't matter now." I comforted him with a light smile. "Now that I'm with you, brother, he can't interfere anymore, right?" Victor blushed completely, turned his head away from looking at me, and replied softly with a yes. I actually didn't deliberately try to treat his depression. I just treated him as a normal person, tried my best to make him happy, coaxed him like coaxing a child, and gave him enough sense of security. Naturally, he got a lot better. I made up for all the inferiority and sensitivity brought to him by his original family. He became more and more dependent on me, and besides that, he also became more confident and energetic. The assistant talked with me. Actually, I always think that it's not good for the boss to attach his personal emotions to others. But there's really no other way. He might be a love-struck person. He didn't dare to say these 3 words, and I didn't help him complete it either. It's enough that we understood each other tacitly. Actually, I also think it's not good. His spiritual core is others instead of himself. So once something unexpected happens to me, his spirit won't be able to support him to continue living. I sighed. But there's no such thing as having the best of both worlds in life. Since I've accepted him, I should also accept the diversity of human personalities embodied in him. I don't want to force him to change anything. In a normal intimate relationship, both people should get spiritual pleasure and abundance from it, instead of painful changes. I hope he can be happy. As for other things, they're all trifles. On the 3rd anniversary, I found out that I was pregnant. Victor was very nervous and also a bit dejected and restless to the point that he couldn't fall asleep. I couldn't help asking him what was wrong. He hugged me and said sadly and pitifully, "Darling, I'm afraid that I won't be a good father. What if I can't raise the child well? Will you blame me in the future?" "No." I touched his head. "You'll always be more important than the child. The child is born into a family like ours. They definitely won't starve to death. What they'll grow up to be like and what kind of life they'll live all depend on themselves. Brother, we're the ones who will accompany each other for a lifetime." His eyes widened. He wanted to say something but couldn't say it out. After a while, he said in a muffled voice, "Darling, you're so strange. Maybe. After having children, people in East Asia always regard themselves as candles burning for their children and spend their whole lives paving the way for them. I don't want to be like that. Life is only a few decades short. How boring it would be if we don't live for ourselves." Victor is a bit different from me. He's so eager to have a family. In his impression, a gentle wife, obedient or naughty children are the most beautiful vision of happiness. Actually, I think you'll do very well. I told Victor, all the things you longed for in your childhood will be made up for in the child. You'll be very kind to him. And in the process of being kind to the child, it will, in turn, heal his once sad and painful childhood. That's why I'm willing to have this child for him. Victor hugged me and said softly, "You're the most important. I just want a baby. I'll definitely be kind to him, very, very kind." "Yes." I smiled and said to him, "I believe you. I believe that he'll be very good, very happy and live a long life. I'll accompany him, watch him achieve success and fame, and have a happy life. We'll have a wonderful future." Extra story 1. Victor never told Grace that the first time he saw her was by the stinking ditch behind the high school campus. He was so dirty and smelly at that time, starving to death, and rummaged in the trash can for food. Then he met Grace. She was like a fairy at that time, wearing a white dress, standing calmly at the entrance of the alley and looking at him for a moment with a look of pity in her eyes. She took out 2,000 yuan from her body and gave it to him.